Okay guys, Dave Rogenmoser here with the Webinar Bootcamp, and in this video we're going to talk about how to improve your sales rate. And so you gave your webinar, and maybe as you track the stats you're looking and you just didn't get the sales rate that you wanted. Maybe you didn't hit that 1% of registrants minimum benchmark there, and so you realize you need to improve that. That's okay. When you're starting off on a webinar, the sales rate can be a difficult thing to get going. However, I think this is one of my favorite things to improve. And I think early on, this is where the meat of your time really will be as far as improving the sales rate. And so there's really just kind of a few components that we need to really work on, and don't take these lightly. I mean, there's only a few, but they're really, really important, and they're pretty meaty here. So the first one is just improving our webinar. And so what I do every single week after the webinars, I come in here into Webinar Jam and I export the chat history. I go to analytics there, then I go to inside your webinar, and then down at the bottom you can see the red arrow, download chat history. And I take that chat history and I go back through all the questions, all the feedback, all the comments, and I try to learn from the people that were there. I learn from the questions that they have. I learn from the needs that they have. And that tells a very important story that then affects my webinar presentation. So every week I spend hours redoing the webinar presentation, adding things to it, recrafting the offer, making different, guarantees or better guarantees, and just overall polishing it up, because I know that has a massive impact on this here. And so I just want to kind of analyze the obstacles that people present and the questions that people ask. And so the first question I ask myself is, am I overcoming their specific objections? And so I look and I'll see people that might say, oh, I can't do this. I don't have an email list. Or the last questions will say, hey, do you have to know how to run Facebook ads to do this? And I know that in some way that objection was coming up in their mind. It probably came up in a lot of other people's minds. And even if I was going to cover it, it came up at a certain point that they felt they needed to ask it. And so I want to go back into my webinar, and around that point or by that point, I want to try to start adding in content that can overcome those objections there and make sure I'm really, really clear about that. And so you'll see objections that come up or, in the form of questions. And you just want to make sure that you're overcoming those objections with your content. Secondly, are you answering all of their questions? And so, people will have all sorts of questions on there, and they'll be asking them in your webinar. Well, I go back through all the chat and I actually make a list of all the questions asked, and I make sure I have content multiple times sometimes, that address their questions so that they don't have any other questions left. And then what about, at the end of your webinar, what questions are they asking about your offer? And so are they confused about something? Are they asking, hey, is this live or is it pre-recorded? Are they asking, what questions are they asking? And can you actually go build that into your webinar, particularly at the end? And so I always go back through and I add new content to solve these issues. I want to, be looking for things in the chat where maybe, people go silent for a while. So go silent for kind of 20 minutes. And I know that point wasn't that engaging. Can I spice that point up? Can I add engagement at that point somewhere? I mean, the chat tells a huge story about what's happening in your webinar, and just going back through there, making a list of all the questions and all the objections that come up can be really powerful, and especially the questions at the end of the webinar. You remember in the webinar content training videos that I created for you at the end of my webinar, I've got all the FAQ, that comes up one slide at a time. I want to go back and I want to put all of their objections into that FAQ. So that FAQ for me gets longer and longer every single week, trying to build up to the point of needing, not having to have a whole lot, because I'm answering all of their questions in that, because people have questions, but they don't even ask them on the chat. So this is hugely important. Export the chat every single week, go back through and rework your webinar. Secondly, what I recommend you do is to watch your webinar replay. So actually go back and see how the delivery went. How was your tone and energy? Did you have high energy? Did you have a positive tone? I mean, how just was the tone and energy? Or were you very monotone like this? Or maybe you were too quiet, or, whatever it might be, guys. You want to have a good energy and tone that people, enjoy being around. Were you engaging with the audience much? It's okay. The first webinar, sometimes you just stick to the script and you can't even think about going back in the chat and talking to people and, answering their questions there. That's okay. But that's a question I would ask. Are you engaging with the audience much? Were you giving a presentation, or were you more giving or having a conversation with the people there? I recommend, as you keep going more and more, have a conversation with the people. How was your pace? I tend to go too fast on my webinars. I have to slow down. I have to remind myself. I have to breathe deep. But some of you guys might go too slow. You might kind of be dragging on, and it's kind of hard to stay with you. And so you just want to make sure you've got a good pace that's easy to follow. Were you using trial closes? You remember in the webinar presentation video training video that I created, I talk about trial closes. Are you asking people, hey, does that make sense? Do you guys see how you could do that? Are you asking questions that they could have a yes response to in their head? So you want them nodding their head at the end. I recommend you have those written out, or a few of those written out on a note card next to your computer. Also, what were your nervous tics? Were you saying certain words over and over? I tend to say, or I say, guys, guys. Do you say that? Do you say a lot? Do you say like? There's all sorts of words that we kind of throw in there just because, and it can get annoying if you're an audience member, and sometimes people will leave because of our nervous tics. And so just make note of those and try to work on removing those out of your vocabulary there. So it's really important to go back through and actually watch your webinar and just take notes on the whole thing. As you listen to it from the audience perspective, are there certain parts that are boring? Are there certain points that just don't seem that exciting? Maybe you need to go back and revamp those right there. So really important to do that. A few other final thoughts here on, improving the actual webinar. If you're not making sales, consider lowering your price point for your offer, or breaking it into payments. And so I had one client that was selling his product for $800, or 3 payments, I think, of $300. And what really worked for him was he split it into 6 payments of $150, I think it was. And when he did that on one of his webinars, he started getting a whole bunch of people to buy. They were still paying $900, but they just needed a little bit lower obstacle, and that really increased his sales rate for his particular audience. So consider lowering that price point and breaking it into more payments there. Also, something that helps is just get a wingman if you haven't already, and have them engage in the chat. So just get a friend, or a VA or somebody that can actually hop in there and just start to chat people, engage people in the chat, to help warm people up. And Chris is the guy that does that for us here, and he does an amazing job. And a lot of times people buy just because they like Chris, and he's been so helpful, and he kind of makes it all happen. So hugely important person in there if you have that right now. At some point you'll want to get that. It's okay if you don't have it right out of the gate, but be thinking about that as well. So the other factor to think about is, the sales page. That's one thing you can test here. So you've got a great webinar presentation. I think that's the meat of this, but I think slowly, week by week, you can be improving your sales page. And so a few things you can put on your sales page is, first of all, you can add FAQ to the sales page. If you look at other sales pages and our sales pages, at the bottom, we'll kind of start adding questions and answers to that people have commonly about our program at the bottom of there. You can start to add social proof to the sales page. So if you have video testimonials, you can put those on there. If you have just pictures of people plus quotes, you can put that on there. If you've been, featured in some magazines or some sort of online, whatever websites, you can put logos of that on there. You can start to add in a little bit of social proof on there. Thirdly, you can start to add scarcity. So you might get a countdown timer on there saying, hey, this offer is going to end, in 3 days or a certain number of days. Let them know it's a limited time offer. Let them know it's a special offer. It's available right now. And when it's gone, it's gone. That can be really effective part of this, guys. But, ultimately, early on, I think the most important thing to think about is your actual webinar presentation. And so I spend hours every week redoing that, improving that, because ultimately the goal is to put this on Evergreen. I don't want to go there too soon. I think that's a mistake, but if I get my presentation good at first, then I can go put that into an Evergreen funnel, and that allows that to stay constant, and allows us to test all the other metrics of the funnel, knowing that the webinar presentation is a constant there. And so we need to get that right first, and I think that is one of the most important parts of this entire optimization automation, just going through and improving your offer, improving your messaging, creating something that resonates with your audience and an offer that actually they want to buy. So spend good time each week doing that. And this will all dramatically improve your sales rate, guy. Remember, even a 1% to a 2% sales rate increase will double all of the money that you get from your funnel there. And so that can be huge, guys. It can be huge to work on this, and this will improve pretty dramatically over time, I believe, guys. All right, sounds good. I'll see you guys in the next video.